And I want to say something to the school children of America who were watching the live coverage of the shuttle's takeoff. I know it's hard to understand, but sometimes painful things like this happen. It's all part of the process of exploration and discovery.
3 switches. That's all it took to unravel everything we thought we knew about the Challenger disaster. 3 switches, flipped by human hands, in a cockpit that was supposed to be vaporized. When Navy divers descended into the dark Atlantic waters weeks after the explosion,
the tragedy was that a whole structure was set up in the United States whereby children sat and were assembled before their television screens right across the United States to watch the launch of Challenger. And Krista McAuliffe, their teacher in space, who was scheduled to carry out lessons from orbit.
They expected to find scattered debris, twisted metal, nothing recognizable. What they found instead sent a shockwave through NASA that they tried to bury for years. The crew compartment was intact, and the evidence inside proved something terrifying. The 7 astronauts didn't die in that fireball 73 seconds after launch. They survived it. And for the next 2 minutes and 45 seconds, they fell from the edge of space, fully conscious.
I would not recommend that we launch below 53 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was primarily based on the experience we'd had 1 year earlier that concerned us.
Fighting to save a ship that could never be saved. This is the story they didn't teach you in school. Chapter 1. The Frozen Gamble. The morning of January 28, 1986, Florida looked like it had been transported to the Arctic. Temperatures had plunged into the 20s. Massive icicles hung from the launch tower like frozen teeth. Safety teams scrambled across the platform, terrified that the ice would break off during liftoff and shatter the heat tiles. But the real danger was invisible. Deep inside the solid rocket boosters, rubber O-rings designed to seal critical joints had turned brittle in the cold.
Some meteorologist in Orlando said, these strong winds that canceled our launch today, that there's a real cold front behind that. And by tomorrow morning, it may be down as close as 18 degrees Fahrenheit as cold.
They had lost their flexibility. They had become hard plastic. And the engineers who built them knew exactly what that meant. The night before launch, Morton Theocole's engineering team held an emergency teleconference with NASA.
And it was one of those hairs on the back of the neck moment when I realized they're not listening.
They begged them to delay. The data was clear. The seals would fail. Launching in these temperatures was gambling with lives. NASA refused. The program was behind schedule. A teacher named Krista McAuliffe was on board, and her lesson was supposed to broadcast during the school day. The optics of another delay were unacceptable.
I ever did in my life. I told NASA I would not sign that recommendation. I feel we're taking risks that we should not take. It'll have to come from the plant, if it comes from anybody, but not me.
So the managers told the engineers to stop thinking like engineers and start thinking like managers. The launch proceeded. At T-0, the rockets ignited. The shuttle lifted off, climbing through the frozen air, trailing a pillar of fire. To the millions watching, it looked perfect, majestic, the pride of America rising toward the heavens. But hidden in the smoke, something was already dying. 73 seconds. Less than a second after ignition, a puff of black smoke appeared at the joint of the right booster. The O-ring had failed, just as the engineers predicted. Hot gas was escaping through the gap. Then something strange happened. The leak seemed to stop. Aluminum oxide from the burning fuel had plugged the hole like a temporary bandage. For nearly a minute, the shuttle climbed normally. The crew felt nothing wrong. Mission Control saw nothing wrong. They were going to make it. And then they hit the wind shear. It was the strongest wind shear ever recorded during a shuttle launch. High-altitude gusts slammed into the vehicle, shaking it violently. Vibration broke the temporary seal. A jet of superheated flame shot out of the booster like a blowtorch aimed directly at the external fuel tank. The strut holding the booster to the tank burned through. The bottom of the tank collapsed. Liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen mixed and ignited. Here's what most people don't understand. It wasn't an explosion in the traditional sense.
And I went up to my computer console, that monitors all the data that comes from the solid rocket boosters, but also has an inset of NASA Select video of the launch.
There was no bomb, no detonation. What happened was an aerodynamic breakup. The shuttle was flying sideways at twice the speed of sound, and the atmosphere tore it apart. This distinction matters. If it had been a high explosive blast, everything would have been pulverized. But because it was structural failure, large pieces survived. The wings sheared off, the tail snapped, the engines tumbled away, and the crew compartment, built to be the strongest part of the ship, ripped free from the cargo bay and kept flying. The cabin wasn't destroyed, it was ejected. And inside, 7 astronauts were still strapped to their seats, still alive, carried upward by pure momentum to a peak altitude of 65,000 feet. Then gravity took over. The hunt in the darkness. The Atlantic Ocean is an indifferent graveyard. It swallows ships and planes and secrets without leaving a trace. In the winter of 1986, it had swallowed the pride of America's space program. The search grid covered nearly 500 square miles of shifting sand and deep currents. Navy ships, submarines, and research vessels scanned the ocean floor around the clock. Sonar operators stared at their screens until their eyes burned, marking every contact, chasing every shadow. Most of them were nothing. Old refrigerators, oil drums, rock formations that looked like wreckage but weren't. And lurking just outside the exclusion zone,
That would all happen in the first 6 or 7 tenths of a second, and we would see a leak sprung, and that the whole thing would probably explode by the time it cleared the tower.
Soviet intelligence ships watched everything. Their antennas bristled with listening equipment, tracking every radio frequency, every movement of the recovery fleet. The paranoia was suffocating. If the Russians reached the wreckage first, they could steal classified technology or plant false evidence. The Cold War was being fought in the waves above a scattered tomb. Then, in early March, everything changed. The USS Preserver was running a routine sonar sweep in a low probability sector. The operator on duty was watching the waterfall display, a scrolling image of the seafloor built from sound waves. Suddenly, a signature appeared that made him freeze. It wasn't the scattered debris pattern of a high-speed impact. Aircraft that hit water at terminal velocity shred into confetti. The pieces are small and spread across miles. This signal was different. It was solid, heavy. It had sharp edges and right angles. Nature doesn't make geometry like that. The ship circled back. The image sharpened. A massive object, roughly 30 feet long, sitting upright in the silt, partially buried, unmistakably artificial. The room went silent. There was only one piece of the shuttle that matched those dimensions, the crew compartment. But something about the signature was deeply wrong. It was too intact. The shuttle had been torn apart at 46,000 feet.
I breathed a great sigh of relief, and it wasn't until 73 seconds later that this big explosion occurred.
Everyone assumed the destruction was total. The official narrative was vaporization. The shadow on the screen told a different story. Descent into the tomb. The divers went down following a guideline into absolute darkness. At 100 feet, there is no light from the surface. Only the hiss of the regulator and the rattle of bubbles against their ears. The current tugged at their gear, trying to drag them away. One wrong fin kick would stir the silt into a blinding cloud. When the lead diver's light finally hit the object, he stopped moving. The sonar hadn't lied. The crew compartment was sitting there, tilted slightly in the sand. White thermal tiles were scorched and missing in patches, revealing aluminum skin underneath. Wires floated around it like the tentacles of some mechanical sea creature. The windows were still intact. Through the murky water, the diver could see into the flight deck. It wasn't empty. The seats were there, the control panels were there, and the crew was still inside. The cabin hadn't been crushed like everyone hoped. It had been deformed by the impact, flattened by the force of hitting water at 200 miles per hour, but it was still recognizable. Still a room. This meant the forces in the air hadn't killed them. The fireball hadn't killed them. The fall killed them. The switches that changed everything. When investigators cleaned the salt water from the instrument panels, they discovered something that NASA didn't want to discuss for years. 3 switches had been flipped. Switches that could only be moved by a human hand.
You know, it's a horrible, tragic accident. We need to get to the bottom of it, figure out what happened so it doesn't happen again. But this is not going to stop the Space Shuttle program. We're going to get back to safe flight as soon as we can.
Pilot Mike Smith had been trying to restore power to the cockpit. He was fighting to regain control of a ship that no longer existed. Then they examined the personal egress air packs. Emergency oxygen supplies mounted behind each seat. 4 packs were recovered. 3 had been activated. Here's the detail that changes everything. Mike Smith's pack was turned on, but it was located in a position he couldn't reach while strapped in. That means Ellison Onizuka, or Judith Resnick, sitting behind him, had reached forward to activate his air supply. They were helping each other. For 2 minutes and 45 seconds, the crew of the Challenger was alive and conscious inside that falling cockpit. They watched the sky change from black to blue. They heard the wind screaming louder as they accelerated. They felt the sickening weightlessness of freefall. And they worked the problem. They didn't panic. They didn't give up. They were astronauts until the very last second. The impact at 200 miles per hour generated forces of 200 Gs. It was instantly fatal. There was no suffering at the end. But the minutes before the end, that's the part that haunts everyone who knows the truth. The weight of hubris. The pieces of the Challenger rest now in a decommissioned missile silo at Cape Canaveral, sealed in concrete.
It's all part of taking a chance and expanding man's horizons. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted.
NASA treats it like a tomb because that's exactly what it is. But here's what the conspiracy theories miss. The real cover-up wasn't aliens, or Soviet lasers, or sabotage. The real cover-up was a room full of managers who saw the data that said these astronauts would probably die, and they launched anyway because they didn't want bad press. The disturbing truth found in the silt wasn't about what destroyed the shuttle. It was about who destroyed it. Not a foreign enemy, not a mysterious force. Just ordinary bureaucratic cowardice dressed up in procedure. The 7 members of the Challenger crew didn't die as victims. They died as heroes, fighting impossible odds, helping each other breathe, trying to fly a ship that had already been murdered by a decision made in a conference room. The ocean eventually gave them back, but it kept the lesson. Space is hard. Humans are fragile. And the most dangerous force in the universe isn't fire or physics. It's the arrogance of people who think they know better than the warnings right in front of them.